My name is Serena Hayes, and I am 32 years old. If you had asked me on that Christmas Eve what family meant, I might have given you the dictionary version, something about loyalty, blood, or the bonds that tie us together. But the truth, family, at least in the Maxwell household, looked like a polished mahogany table, stemmed glasses catching the chandelier's light, and the quiet ache of pretending not to hear the things meant to cut you. I carved another slice of prime rib and placed it on Aunt Margaret's plate. She gave me the small, apologetic smile she wore at most family gatherings, a little lift at one corner of her mouth that said, "I see you, even when they don't." Beside her, Uncle Robert lifted his wine, throat clearing in the way of men who expect attention. He had ruled Maxwell Construction for decades, king of blueprints and bluster, and tonight his voice filled the room like a verdict. "Let's be honest," he announced, cupping the bowl of his glass as if it were an audience. "Some things need to go back to the way they were intended. Leadership positions should stay in the bloodline." Aunt Linda didn't wait for the echo to settle. "Exactly," she chimed in, tipping her glass in my direction. "Blood is thicker than water. It's time we remembered that." There it was, the cut. No knife required. Derek and Melissa sat across from me, flanking a gilded centerpiece like bookends. Derek, 28, cufflinks, and a jaw he worked when he was pleased with himself, smirked over the rim of his glass. Melissa offered me a bright, brittle smile, the kind people use when they've already decided who belongs in a picture and who doesn't. "Don't take offense, Serena," Derek said, dragging out my name the way children test a fragile toy. "It's just, Grandpa built Maxwell Construction for Maxwells." I smiled the way you do when you're not allowed to laugh. I understand the sentiment. Uncle Robert leaned back, pleased with the shape of the conversation. He'd perfected the tone of benevolent patriarch over 40 years, the kind that made cruelty sound like duty. "We've been discussing company structure," he said, watching me the way a cat watches a mouse pretend it's not cornered. "Going forward, we need to ensure leadership is committed to the Maxwell name." "But Serena is committed," Aunt Margaret murmured, fingers tightening around her napkin. "She has her own interests," Robert cut in. "All that computer business. We need people invested in our legacy." My water tasted colder than it should have. "I'm sure you'll do what you think is best." Aunt Linda refilled her glass. "Serena's done well for herself considering where she came from." She said it sweetly, like a compliment, like a pat on the head. I heard the room the way you hear a storm gathering. Small sounds amplified, the clink of flatware, the whisper of linen, the throat-clearing cough of someone about to add a nail to a coffin. Somewhere behind me, the hallway grandfather clock ticked, a steady metronome to the performance. I wouldn't give them a scene. That was the rule. Serena stays calm. Serena is gracious. Serena does not bleed where they can see. "I bake the rolls," Melissa said to no one in particular, then to me. "If you want, I can give you the recipe. It's simple." "Thank you," I said. "I manage." Her cheeks flashed, then cooled. "Right." Uncle Robert tapped his spoon against his glass. "Well," he declared, "since we're all here, family, let's toast to the future of Maxwell Construction. To legacy, to keeping it where it belongs." Aunt Margaret's hand brushed my wrist beneath the table. It was a touch that said, "Don't more than do." I folded my napkin carefully, aligning its edge with the plate's curve. The chandelier threw white fire across the crystal. Tiny stars trembled in every glass. "To legacy," Aunt Linda repeated, eyes shining with the kind of triumph that only feels holy if you've never questioned your throne. "Legacy," Derek echoed, already wearing a promotion like a new suit. "Legacy," Melissa sang, and lifted her chin at me as if asking whether I understood the lyrics. I touched my glass to my lips and didn't drink. The story of how I landed at this table was familiar enough to be family lore. When I was 7, a car accident took both my parents in a single night, and my mother's sister, Aunt Margaret, opened her door. She didn't have children of her own. She said there was room for me, and meant it. Uncle Robert said it was right to do what one owed the dead. He made sure I knew the difference. "We're raising you out of duty," he told me when I was 9, and again when I was 11, and again at 16 for emphasis. "Don't mistake gratitude for entitlement." I didn't mistake it. I carried it like a glass, carefully, quietly, and far from the edge of any table. When I graduated valedictorian, Uncle Robert clapped with 2 fingers and told people we'd invested in tutoring. When I got a full scholarship to MIT, Aunt Linda said luck picked its favorites. When I started my own company at 23 and it worked, actually worked, the family settled into a new rhythm of dismissing the unfamiliar. To them, my work was computers, which meant magic, which meant unbelonging. Witchcraft only counts if it's poured into the family goblet. Serena's been awfully quiet, Aunt Linda observed now, tilting her head like a curious bird. Cat got your tongue? Just enjoying the conversation, I said. Aunt Margaret exhaled through her nose, a small sound only I noticed. It meant, please stop poking her. It meant, I don't want to clean blood from linen tonight. I pressed the tines of my fork against the plate and watched a bead of gravy slide along like a planet slipping from orbit. It struck me as funny, the physics of it. Everyone talks about gravity as though it's the main principle of family, what pulls you in, what keeps you from floating away. But there are other forces, momentum, friction, the quiet drift that happens when no one notices you've been moving farther out for years. I suppose there are decisions you'll be announcing, I said lightly, rescuing them from their thirst for a spectacle. If I was going to be cut, I might as well choose the blade. Robert brightened. Since you ask. Derek will step in as VP of Operations next month. Melissa will take finance. And Linda, he lifted his glass to his wife, has agreed to lead a proper HR department. Finally, Melissa breathed, a chance to use my MBA. Aunt Margaret dabbed her mouth. And Serena? The temperature in the room shifted. Maybe it was only my skin. Uncle Robert smiled the way some men smile before closing a door. Serena has carved out a path of her own. We're proud of her independence. Proud. Independence. Words that, when stitched together, make a flag you can wave while you exile someone. It's not just computers, Aunt Margaret said softly. Tell them about your... It's not important, I said. It wasn't. Not to them. Importance here came stamped with a last name and notarized by a family tree. Derek leaned back, fingers laced behind his head, a prince measuring his kingdom. Real leadership, he said, and rolled the words in his mouth like a cigar he wasn't allowed to smoke at the table. Real leadership, I repeated, tasting the ash of it. Exactly what the company needs. Silence drew a pale ring around the room. Aunt Linda shifted. Melissa focused on her wine. Robert studied my face with the intensity of a foreman, checking for cracks in a foundation he insisted was flawless. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see the housekeeper stack plates, efficient and invisible. It struck me that I had arrived in this family the same way, doing the work, leaving no trace, making sure the shine stayed. There is a kind of power in invisibility. You can move the world with the smallest lever if no one is watching your hands. Serena, Aunt Margaret's voice brought me back. You'll stay after? Help me with the dishes? Of course, I said. We finished the prime rib and the roasted carrots and a salad Melissa called wintergreens, as if giving lettuce a season gave it pedigree. Conversation slid to ski trips and a new house in Aspen and someone's designer who understood old money. Minimalism, which is to say, spend a lot to look like you didn't spend at all. If they noticed that I kept my glass full and my mouth empty, they didn't say. If they saw the way my shoulders softened each time Aunt Margaret glanced at me, they ignored it as bad posture. The Maxwell gift has always been selective vision. When the plates cleared, we shifted, the way families do, into comfortable choreography, men to leather chairs, and grand pronouncements, women to kitchen clatter and duty. I rose with Aunt Margaret. She touched my elbow and whispered, I'm sorry. For what? I asked, voice light, knife flashing under the faucet. For all the ways this house insists on being itself. I let the water run hotter until steam blurred the window and turned the yard lights into halos. You've always kept a space for me, I said. That's more than most houses do. She nodded, eyes shining in the steam. Still. In the living room, Uncle Robert's voice gathered momentum. Through the doorway, words drifted in. Revolutionize. Family. Legacy. The old liturgy. I dried my hands and set the knife down. My reflection leaned toward me from the dark window. Steady, a little tired, mouth curved at the edges like I found something funny. What are you thinking? Aunt Margaret asked. I thought of a year when Melissa's wedding bill ballooned beyond reason, and a check appeared without a signature. I thought of a night Derek's gambling debt evaporated like frost under a kind sun. I thought of hospital corridors, of insurance approvals that had been unlikely until they weren't. Quiet levers, quiet hands. I'm thinking, I said, that some lessons only sink in when the floor gives way. Aunt Margaret flinched, not from fear, but recognition. Serena. I know. I softened it with a smile I'd practiced for decades. Pleasant, unthreatening, impossible to quote later. It's Christmas. We should be kind. We should be honest, she said. Through the doorway, Derek laughed. Melissa's voice lifted. Aunt Linda toasted legacy once more, as if saying it enough times would make it true. I gathered the last of the cutlery. They think I don't belong, I said lightly, almost to the sink, almost to myself. What they don't realize is how invested I've always been. Aunt Margaret searched my face. She knew better than to ask for details. She had learned, in the slow, faithful way only certain women learn, that love and silence can look identical from a distance. I carried the tray back to the dining room and set it down. Uncle Robert caught my eye as if he'd summoned me by thinking the word obedience. He lifted his glass, king in his castle, and pronounced, "To those who understand their place." I felt the old ache rise, then pass, like a wave that had learned my shore by heart. I lifted my water. "To those who do their work quietly," I said, and drank to the future. They heard a polite sentiment. I heard a promise. They were about to learn what family loyalty really costs. When people talk about family, they talk about origin stories, who begat whom, where the bloodlines trace. My origin inside the Maxwell family wasn't written in DNA, but in tragedy. I was 7 years old when my world split. One rainy night, a truck slid across a soaked highway, and in a blink, my parents were gone. The next morning, I woke up in a stranger's guest room, clutching a stuffed rabbit that smelled faintly of gasoline. Aunt Margaret had taken me in immediately. She wrapped me in arms that shook but didn't let go. Uncle Robert's words arrived later. "We're doing this out of duty," he told me one week into my new life. His suit smelled like starch and cigars. "Don't confuse that with privilege. You'll remember that, won't you, Serena?" I remembered. I remembered when I turned 9 and he repeated it, slower, in case grief had dulled my comprehension. I remembered at 16 when he said it in front of Derek during Thanksgiving, as if humiliation were seasoning. I remembered every repetition. You learn to remember when the lesson is carved into you like scripture. But Margaret, sweet Margaret, taught me something different. She never once mentioned duty. She said love was the simplest arithmetic. If you had room, you added. I lived in that equation while Robert forced me to recite his. By the time I reached high school, I understood 2 things. I was a guest in their home, and I had to justify every square foot of space I occupied. So I excelled. Top grades, captain of debate, endless extracurriculars. If there was a ladder, I climbed it, and if there wasn't, I built one. When I graduated valedictorian, Robert muttered that private tutors deserve the applause. At the after-party, Aunt Linda quipped, "She's clever, but cleverness doesn't build companies." I smiled, always smiled, while my insides clenched like fists. At MIT, the scholarship letter came addressed only to me. My name in print, no Maxwell signature required. That moment tasted like clean air. Yet at the Christmas after, Robert clinked his glass and called me lucky. Derek rolled his eyes at the idea of charity cases getting scholarships for being sob stories. Every triumph was revised. Every step uphill flattened into luck or pity. But revision only works if you let others hold the pen. Quietly, stubbornly, I began writing my own. At 23, I built something from scratch. While Derek scrolled through sports cars and Melissa took internships she never finished, I worked in cramped apartments with secondhand monitors and a team of 3 friends who believed more in caffeine than in sleep. What started as tinkering with construction data evolved into Meridian Technologies, a platform that changed how projects were designed, monitored, and built. By the time the world took notice, we were already outpacing competitors. By the time Forbes added me to its 30 under 30 list, we had tripled client contracts in 6 months. By the time the Maxwell family glanced up, wondering what I'd been doing all these years, I was running a $2.8 billion enterprise that quietly supported half the construction industry in our state. Maxwell Construction included. 3 years ago, when Robert nearly drove the family empire into bankruptcy with an ill-fated Florida expansion, they didn't know who saved them. They didn't know how close their empire came to foreclosure. They didn't know about the Friday night boardroom where a room full of men in expensive suits whispered collapse, or the Monday morning when Meridian Capital appeared like a ghost investor with $50 million in hand. They never guessed it was me. Robert boasted about the sudden turnaround. Derek bragged to women at bars about his father's strategic genius. Melissa told her friends Maxwell Construction was thriving because of family grit. Meanwhile, I sat across dining tables from them, cutting meat and listening to jokes about how my computer hobby would never amount to anything. None of them knew that the systems Robert praised as revolutionary were coded in my company's offices. None of them knew that the management team keeping the company afloat answered to me, not to him. None of them knew their Christmas bonuses were paid from the profits of contracts I had orchestrated. The irony was exquisite. I was the invisible architect of their survival. I learned early that invisibility has power. When you're unseen, you can move mountains without anyone noticing the shifting earth. When Melissa's wedding spiraled $40,000 over budget, the bills vanished overnight. Derek's gambling debt, $80,000 that could have crippled his credit, melted into thin air. Robert's heart surgery bills, denied twice by insurance, miraculously approved after a mysterious intervention. Anonymous benefactors, they whispered. Family blessings, they assumed. The truth was smaller, sharper. Me, my pen, my check, my refusal to let them collapse under their own weight, not because they deserved it, but because Margaret's lesson still echoed. If you have room, you add. But adding has limits. Even numbers break if you press them hard enough. Back at that Christmas table, as Robert and Linda toasted legacy and Derek grinned like a conquering heir, I remembered every faceless gift, every erased debt, every hour I had poured into keeping them afloat. They thought I was a guest in their story. They didn't realize they were characters in mine. The irony coiled tighter in my chest. I was more Maxwell than any of them, not by blood, but by investment. They carried the name, I carried the weight. And weight, unlike names, is measurable. I helped Margaret clear plates while the others sprawled in leather chairs, talking loudly about expansion plans and future profits. Robert's voice rolled like thunder through the archways. Innovative approaches, revolutionizing the industry. I stacked dishes, listening. Their kingdom only existed because of me. Their thrones balanced on a foundation I had quietly poured. Margaret touched my hand as I rinsed silverware. You know you don't need their approval, she whispered. I smiled faintly. Approval isn't the currency I deal in. She frowned, uncertain. Then what is? I dried my hands slowly, the cloth rough against my skin. Leverage. And in that moment, beneath the clatter of dishes and the thunder of Robert's voice, I decided the leverage I had given them freely was about to be withdrawn. They wanted me invisible. They were about to see what it costs when the invisible disappears. The next day, the memory of that Christmas dinner still hung over me like the smell of too much wine. Words have a way of lingering, especially when they've been sharpened for years to cut in the same place. Uncle Robert's declaration, leadership belongs in the bloodline, echoed every time I closed my eyes. It wasn't new. It was only the latest verse in a hymn he'd been singing since the day I arrived in his house. Still, last night had been different. The chorus wasn't just Robert anymore. It was Linda, Melissa, and Derek, all harmonizing, proud to crown themselves heirs. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. At the table, after Robert announced the new structure, Derek leaned back as though the chair itself bowed to him. Finally, he'd said, stretching his arms, real leadership. The smirk he wore was the kind only people born, cushioned by money, ever perfect. A smile that said, "Of course this is mine. Why are you even asking?" Melissa's face had glowed, her hands clasped like a child receiving a long-promised gift. It's about time I put my MBA to use. I can already see the new financial strategy forming. Linda nodded proudly, sliding her perfectly manicured nails over her husband's sleeve. With me leading HR, the company will finally feel like a true family. Structure, warmth, everything tied together. Their words floated across the table, each syllable gilded with entitlement. I wanted to laugh, not because their claims were funny, but because they had no idea. Not one of them knew that their promotions were empty thrones built on foundations I had poured myself. Aunt Margaret had been the only voice of dissent. "What about Serena?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The room paused. Forks hovered. For a heartbeat, silence stretched. Uncomfortable and accusatory. Robert cleared his throat. Serena has her own pursuits. Independent. Busy with her computer business. It's not just a computer business, Margaret protested softly. She was honored last month for her work. Serena, tell them about it. I I shook my head. It's not important. The truth was, a glossy magazine had named me one of Forbes' 30 under 30 for revolutionizing construction technology. But in that dining room, surrounded by eyes sharpened for envy, the award was a torch I refused to hold. Recognition in the Maxwell family wasn't acknowledgement. It was ammunition. Robert smiled like a man who had shut a door firmly. See, she understands her place. She's done well considering where she came from. Considering where she came from. The phrase hung like smoke. Later, while they retired to the living room to plot out their empire's glorious future, I stood with Margaret in the kitchen doorway, listening. Derek was talking about streamlining operations, which to him meant firing competent people and replacing them with drinking buddies. Melissa bubbled about optimizing cash flow, which translated neatly into raising her own salary. Robert presided as though he were dividing land among vassals, nodding like a benevolent king. Margaret's hand found mine, squeezed. Her eyes said what her voice could not in that moment. You are worth more than this table allows. But words, silent or spoken, couldn't erase the years of being told otherwise. As I stacked plates, memories lined up uninvited. Melissa's wedding. The frantic calls when her venue demanded payment she couldn't cover. The mysterious gift that saved the day. The one she never knew came from me. Derek's gambling problem. The creditors, the late-night panic, the mountain of debt that disappeared overnight. He thought luck favored him. Luck had my name on the check. Robert's surgery. Medical bills denied twice by insurance. Then a sudden approval, as though bureaucracy had shifted by divine intervention. That miracle wore my fingerprints. I had been showing up for them all along. Not with speeches, not with toasts, but with money, solutions, and quiet erasures of their mistakes. I had been the ghost holding their fragile empire upright. And still they called me outsider. Margaret touched my shoulder gently. I don't agree with any of this. I forced a smile. It's okay. No, she whispered fiercely. It isn't. You've done more for this family than anyone else at that table. You show up. You care. I wanted to believe her, but the truth was harder. Caring had never earned me a seat. Family isn't about blood, I told her quietly. It's about who shows up. Her eyes softened. And you always have. But standing in that kitchen, hearing Robert's voice roar about revolutionizing construction, I realized something. Showing up was no longer enough. For years, I had played the silent benefactor, investing from the shadows, saving them without asking for recognition. But last night had made one thing clear. Invisibility doesn't buy belonging. If they wanted a kingdom without me, then perhaps it was time to let them have it, on their own. Let them see what happens when the invisible hand withdraws. I excused myself early, citing an early meeting. Robert barely noticed. Derek and Melissa waved distractedly. Linda smiled as if to say, better luck next time. Margaret kissed my cheek, lingering, searching my eyes for something she couldn't name. I left the house, the winter air sharp against my face. The snow glittered under the street lamps, clean and untouched. My breath clouded white in front of me as I slid into my car. For a long moment, I sat with my hands on the wheel, staring at the house where my childhood had been rewritten as duty, where my adulthood had been dismissed as luck. Then quietly I whispered to myself, no more. The decision crystallized right there, cold and unshakable. Tomorrow I would remind the Maxwells that every empire has a foundation, and foundations crack when you take them for granted. The morning after Christmas, my office was already alive when I arrived. The glass towers of downtown glimmered against the winter sky, and Meridian Technologies' logo reflected off the marble floor in the lobby like a silent crown. Every time I walked through those doors, I felt the same strange paradox. This place was my empire, yet to the Maxwells, I was still a guest. I rode the elevator up to the 32nd floor, watching the numbers climb. The world saw me as a woman who had made it. Corner office, 3 floors of engineers and analysts, a company name whispered in boardrooms. But the family? To them, I was just the charity case who'd grown lucky with computers. Luck, that word had become their favorite weapon. I stepped into my office, minimalist but intentional. Warm wood against glass walls, a desk that commanded attention without needing to shout. From here, I could see the city stretched beneath me, cranes moving like chess pieces across half-built towers. Towers whose foundations relied on my software. Some even carried the Maxwell name. I slipped off my coat, draped it over the chair, and sat down with the quarterly reports. Maxwell Construction's line glared at me in black and white. Positive margins, steady growth. Numbers that looked impressive, unless you knew who had orchestrated every digit. They thought Robert's leadership had turned the company around. They thought Derek's vision and Melissa's education were about to bring a golden age. What they didn't know was that without Meridian's technology, without Meridian's management team, without Meridian's funding, their company was little more than scaffolding over rot. The truth pulsed beneath the ink. I had built their survival. I could dismantle it just as easily. I picked up the phone and dialed Sarah, my investment manager. She had been with me since Meridian's earliest days, a voice of reason, cautious where I was decisive, practical where I was instinct. "Sarah," I said when she answered, "it's Serena." "Morning. You're in early, even for you." "I've made a decision. I need you to initiate a complete divestiture from Maxwell Construction." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the faint shuffle of papers. "You want to pull out?" "Serena, that's one of our most successful turnarounds. They've been posting consistent profits. Market share is stabilizing." I know, my voice was steady, almost cold. "I want out." Her tone sharpened, no longer casual. "Can I ask why? If this is about diversification, there are gentler ways to restructure the portfolio." "It's not about diversification." I swiveled my chair toward the window, the skyline jagged and defiant. "It's personal." Sarah knew better than to push when I said that word. Still, she hesitated. "You realize this means calling in $50 million in callable debt, immediate withdrawal, plus we'd be terminating contracts worth at least $20 million annually. That's seismic." "How fast can it be done?" "For the callable debt, today. For the contracts, most have 30-day termination clauses." "Do it." There was a beat of silence, the kind when someone realizes you're not bluffing. "Serena, this will destroy them. You know that, right?" "Yes." I watched a crane lower a steel beam into place on a site far below. "That's the point." When I hung up, the office hummed with its usual rhythm, keyboards clacking, voices on calls, the low buzz of ambition. But inside me, the decision rang louder than any of it. For years, I had been the hidden spine of Maxwell Construction. I had saved them in silence, kept them standing while they dismissed me, overlooked me, erased me. And last night, they had made it clear I would never be more than an outsider in their story. Fine. If they wanted to live in a world where Serena Hayes didn't count, then they would have it. I would erase myself from their empire and watch what happened when the scaffolding gave way. By noon, the paperwork was in motion. Sarah called back, her voice clipped but efficient. "The withdrawal has been initiated. Their bank will be notified within the hour. As for contracts, termination notices are being prepared. By tomorrow morning, they'll be delivered to Maxwell Construction's executive offices." "And the management team?" I asked. "They're technically employed through Meridian Consulting. We can reassign them within 30 days. "Good, do it." Sarah exhaled. "Serena, once this hits, their entire operation will unravel. Do you want to leave a door open? Some option to renegotiate later?" I looked out at the skyline again, at towers that would stand long after names like Maxwell faded. "No, close it." I leaned back in my chair, the leather cold against my shoulders, and allowed myself the smallest smile. Somewhere across the city, Robert was probably on a golf course, Derek scrolling through his phone, Melissa shopping for a new blazer to wear as VP. None of them had the faintest idea. By the time they learned what had happened, their empire would already be crumbling. I whispered it to the glass, the city lights catching my reflection. "They wanted me gone. Now they'll know what gone feels like." The first missed call came at 10:17 a.m. Uncle Robert. I let it ring. By 10:20, Derek's name flashed. Then Melissa, then Linda, each call stacked like dominoes, desperate fingers pressing redial. I watched the screen light up, one after another, and did nothing. By noon, there were 11 missed calls. By 1 o'clock, 17. The family who once told me I didn't belong now couldn't seem to breathe without me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the window, watching the city below as if the chaos in their world had nothing to do with me. And in truth, it didn't anymore. At 2 o'clock, my phone vibrated again. Aunt Margaret. I almost answered. Almost. Something in me softened when her name appeared, but I hesitated long enough that the call rolled to voicemail. A minute later, she tried again. This time, I picked up. Her voice trembled with confusion. "Serena, do you know what's happening? Robert came home in a panic. He said something about a $50 million loan being called in. That can't be true, can it? I swirled my coffee, watching the ripples fade. It's possible. But where would such a loan even come from? He kept saying some investor pulled out. He looked terrified. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us until Margaret's voice cracked. Serena, please, tell me the truth. I can't, I said softly. Not yet. She exhaled shakily. Robert wants to speak with you. He's begging. I've never seen him like this. I'm sure he is. Will you call him back? I'll think about it. I ended the call before she could press further. The rest of the day unfolded like silk. Lunch with a potential client at a rooftop restaurant. Laughter that felt easy, as though my heart weren't wrapped in ice. Afternoon meetings about expanding Meridian's reach into Europe. A glass of wine in the evening with a venture partner who wanted to introduce me to someone from Dubai. And then, dinner with Aunt Margaret. I chose the restaurant deliberately. Her favorite Italian spot tucked in a corner of the city, all warm lights and the smell of garlic in the air. She looked tired when she arrived, but she smiled when she saw me. Robert wanted me to stay home tonight, she admitted as we sat down, but I told him I needed space. I poured her water. You deserve more than space. You deserve peace. Her eyes searched mine, but she didn't mention the company. Didn't ask questions she wasn't ready for answers to. Instead, we talked about the weather, the food, the trip she still dreamed of taking to Florence. For 2 hours, we pretended the world wasn't unraveling. When I drove her home, she squeezed my hand. Whatever happens, Serena, you're my family, always. The words pressed against the armor I'd built, threatening to crack it. By the time I reached my own apartment, my phone displayed 37 missed calls. Robert, Derek, Melissa, Linda, all of them reaching for the invisible hand they had once ignored. I set the phone face down on the counter, poured myself another glass of wine, and opened my laptop. Tomorrow, the termination notices would arrive at Maxwell Construction's headquarters. Their executives, the ones I had quietly installed, would be reassigned. Their systems would begin the slow bleed of reverting to basic functionality. Robert's empire would feel the first tremors of collapse. And for the first time in years, I felt no obligation to stop it. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling while the city hummed outside my window. My thoughts replayed the Christmas dinner. Robert's voice, Derek's smirk, Melissa's glee, Linda's toast. They thought leadership was a crown passed by blood. They thought my silence was weakness. They had no idea. They were about to learn that the quietest one at the table had been holding the floor beneath their feet all along. The king's throne was built on sand, and the tide had just come in. By the next morning, the cracks in Robert's empire were wide enough to swallow him whole. At 7:05 a.m., as I stepped into Meridian's lobby, I spotted him immediately. My uncle, once so proud of his pressed suits and commanding presence, now looked like a man who'd aged 10 years overnight. His hair was rumpled, his tie askew, and his eyes carried the sleepless red of panic. "Serena!" His voice was hoarse, desperate, startling enough that a few employees glanced our way. I paused, adjusting the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "Uncle Robert, this is unexpected. We need to talk, please." I studied him for a moment, then gestured toward the elevator. "Fine, come up." He followed me silently, shoulders hunched, the elevator's polished steel reflecting a man stripped of authority. When we reached my office, he stopped in the doorway, staring as though he'd never truly seen me before. The wide windows, the panoramic view of the skyline, the sleek design that spoke of power and precision, it all unsettled him. "This place, I had no idea." "Most people don't," I replied, settling behind my desk. "What can I do for you, Uncle Robert?" He sank into the chair across from me, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles went white. "It's the company. Something terrible has happened. Our main investor pulled out overnight. 50 million, gone. Just like that. And now the bank is breathing down our necks. They're threatening foreclosure." I folded my hands calmly. "That's unfortunate." "It's worse than unfortunate," he snapped, then caught himself, softening his tone. "It's a disaster. Without that investment, we can't meet payroll, can't cover our debts. And the software," he leaned forward, eyes frantic, "the systems we rely on, they're shutting down. We've been notified support ends in 30 days. Do you understand what that means? We can't run the business without those systems." "Yes," I said quietly. "I understand perfectly." Robert dragged a hand down his face. "The lawyers say the contracts allow this. Whoever wrote them was too clever. There's no legal recourse, nothing we can do. I let a beat of silence pass before speaking. So why are you here? His eyes darted to mine, pleading. Because we need help. I need help. You have connections, Serena. Investors. People who trust you. If you could introduce us, just point us toward someone who might step in. I swiveled my laptop around so the screen faced him. The homepage of Meridian Capital glowed in the morning light. Crisp fonts and polished success stories splashed across the screen. You mean someone like this? He squinted. Meridian Capital. Yes, that name keeps coming up. They were our mystery investor. Do you know them? I tilted my head, meeting his eyes evenly. I am them. For a long moment, silence devoured the room. Robert blinked, then let out a strangled laugh. That's impossible. It isn't. My voice was calm, steady. Meridian Technologies owns Meridian Capital, and I own both. 3 years ago, when your company was drowning, I invested $50 million. I restructured your debt. I provided the systems that made your operations efficient. I installed the management team that turned losses into profit. I saved Maxwell Construction. He stared at me, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. No, that can't. It can, I cut in, sharper now. While you were boasting about brilliant leadership, I was the one holding the company together. While Derek bragged about his future as VP, I was paying off his debts. While Melissa gushed about legacy, I was covering her wedding costs. While Linda toasted family, I was funding her vacations. And while you told me at Christmas that I didn't belong, I owned 60% of the company you call a bloodline. Robert slumped back, the weight of my words crashing down on him. His lips trembled. I had no idea. Of course you didn't. You never asked what I actually do. You just assumed I was dabbling with computers. His hands shook as he reached for his glass of water. He didn't drink, just held it, clinging to it like a lifeline. Serena, I was wrong. About everything. You've accomplished more than any of us, and His voice cracked. I treated you like you weren't family. I dismissed you, I mocked you, and now I need you. I leaned back, studying the man who had spent years carving the word duty into my skin as if it were love. Tell me, Uncle Robert, I said softly. Are you sorry because of what you did, or because you finally realize what I've done? He broke then. His shoulders sagged, his face pale with sweat. Both. God help me, both. The silence between us thickened until it was almost unbearable. And then I smiled, a small, sharp smile that made his eyes widen. Good, I said, because now you're going to learn what family loyalty really costs. Robert's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The man who once commanded construction crews with a bark and boardrooms with a fist now looked like a child waiting to be scolded. You want me to save Maxwell Construction? I asked, my tone crisp. He nodded quickly, desperate. Yes, please. Without you, the company will collapse in weeks. Serena, I'll do anything. I rose from my chair and walked to the window. The city stretched before us, steel and glass, catching the morning sun. So many buildings, so many foundations. I thought of how each one required care, calculation, balance, something Robert had never understood. He had believed legacy alone could keep structures standing. I'll tell you what's going to happen, I said, still facing the skyline. His chair creaked as he leaned forward, hope flashing in his eyes. Yes? Maxwell Construction will fail, I said flatly. Within 6 months, maybe less. And when it does, I'll buy the assets for pennies on the dollar. I'll rebrand it Meridian Construction. I'll retain every employee who wants to stay, under better pay and benefits. I'll build it into something real. Robert paled. What about us? I turned then, slowly, deliberately. What about you? Derek, Melissa, Linda, me. We've given everything to that company. We can't just... You haven't given anything, I snapped, finally letting my voice harden. Derek strolls in late and leaves early. Melissa waves an MBA she's never used like it's a passport to leadership. Linda collects bonuses and hosts luncheons. And you, Robert, you spend more time on golf courses than at job sites. Meanwhile, I've been funding, structuring, saving. Tell me, what exactly have you given? His lips quivered. We kept the legacy alive. Legacy doesn't pay debts, I said coldly. Competence does. He swallowed hard. Please, Serena, give us another chance. Give me another chance. I folded my arms. Fine, here are the terms. He straightened, clinging to the word like a drowning man to driftwood. Derek will be fired in the first week, I began. He's incompetent and careless. Melissa can apply for an entry-level position if she's willing to learn the business from the ground up. Linda can apply too, provided she earns it through merit. As for you, I let the silence hang. You'll work as a foreman, on the ground, wearing a hard hat, not a crown. Robert's face drained of color. You can't be serious. I am. That would humiliate us. Humiliate me. Exactly. He blinked, stunned. Why? Why would you do this? I leaned forward, resting my hands on the desk. Because humiliation is the only language you understand. For years, you humiliated me, reminding me I wasn't blood, dismissing every success, cutting me down at every table. You wanted me on the outside, looking in. Now, Robert, you get to know how that feels. His breath came shallow, fast. Serena, I'm begging you. I'll make you a partner. I'll give you respect, recognition, whatever you want. I studied him, this man who once thought raising me was charity. I don't want to be your partner, and I don't want your respect. I want you to feel the weight of what you built, not with money, but with arrogance. I want you to understand that family isn't entitlement. It's work. It's showing up when it matters. His hands shook as he gripped the arms of the chair. You'll ruin us. No, I said softly. You already ruined yourselves. I'm just removing the scaffolding. For a moment, the office was silent except for his ragged breathing. Then, in a voice stripped of pride, Robert whispered, I'll do it, whatever you ask. I sat back, folding my hands. Not yet. First, you'll admit what you did wrong. He blinked at me. I already said I was sorry. No, I corrected. You apologize because you need my money. I want you to admit what you did. Every single thing. Robert's jaw tightened, his face flushing. That's not easy. Neither was growing up in your house. His eyes dropped to the carpet. Slowly, haltingly, he began. I treated you like you weren't family. Keep going. I made you feel unwelcome at every gathering. His voice cracked. I dismissed your achievements. I assumed your success was luck or pity or charity. His words stumbled. I never gave you credit. I mocked you. I envied you. There it was, the truth trembling out of him like a confession. And what else? I pressed. His eyes filled, his voice breaking. I knew it was you. The anonymous gifts, the debts that vanished, the bills that were paid. I knew. Deep down, I knew. And instead of thanking you, I pretended it was fate, or nothing, because I couldn't bear to admit the girl I called an outsider was the only one keeping us alive. His chest heaved. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, shaking. I let the silence hang, heavy and deliberate. Finally, I leaned back and said, now we're starting to get somewhere. Robert's confession hung in the air like smoke after a fire, acrid, undeniable, and impossible to breathe around. His shoulders trembled beneath the weight of words he'd never meant to speak aloud. I didn't move. I wanted him to sit in it, to feel the sting of truths he had avoided for decades. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bloodshot, desperate. Is that enough? No, I said calmly. It's a start. He pressed his palms together as though praying. Serena, I admit it. I treated you like a burden. I made you feel less than. I shut you out because I was jealous. You had everything I didn't. Brilliance, resilience, the drive to build something lasting. And I couldn't stand that the adopted girl had surpassed the blood heirs. The words sliced through me. Adopted girl, surpassed. They should have felt like triumph, but instead they dripped with years of bitterness. I kept my voice even. So you punish me for succeeding? He winced. Yes. I told myself I was protecting the family legacy, but the truth is, I was protecting my pride. Finally, honesty, stripped of ceremony. I circled my desk and stood in front of him. You want another chance? You want me to even consider saving Maxwell Construction? Yes, he whispered. Then it won't be quiet this time. No more secrets. You're going to call Derek, Melissa, and Linda. You're going to tell them exactly who I am, exactly what I've done, and you're going to admit, word for word, that you were wrong. His face blanched. Serena, that would humiliate me. Good, I said, ice in my tone. Humiliation is honesty's twin. You've lived on lies long enough. Now you'll live on truth. He slumped, broken. If I do this, will you save us? I let silence stretch. He searched my face for mercy, but I gave him none. Maybe, I said finally, but the terms will be mine. Different ownership, different management, different family dynamics. Nothing will go back to the way it was. What kind of terms? His voice shook. I'll own 80% of the company, I said without hesitation. You, Derek, and Melissa can earn equity back only through performance. Linda will have to apply for a real job like anyone else. No titles, no gifts, no nepotism. His jaw tightened. That strips us of everything. That's the point. He buried his face in his hands. For a long moment, the office was quiet except for the hum of the city outside. When he finally looked up, his eyes glistened. Serena, why? After everything I did, why help us at all? Why not just let us die? I studied him, remembering the years of cold stares, the clipped words, the constant reminder that I was obligation, not family. And yet, behind it all, I remembered Aunt Margaret's steady kindness, the way she'd fought for me in quiet ways no one else ever did. Because Margaret taught me something you never understood, I said. Family isn't blood. It's who shows up when it matters, even when they don't deserve it, especially then. He flinched, the truth cutting deeper than any threat could. Robert's voice broke. I don't deserve saving. No, I agreed. You don't. But the 247 employees who depend on Maxwell Construction, they do, and Margaret does. So if I save you, it won't be for you. It will be for them. Tears slid down his cheeks, unchecked now. What do you want me to do? I leaned in, my voice steady. Call them, tell the truth, admit everything. And when you've finished, when they know who really saved them, then maybe I'll consider building something new from the ruins you left behind. He nodded slowly, defeated, broken in a way I had never seen. I'll do it. I'll make the calls. Good. I returned to my desk and sat, reclaiming my space. He stayed hunched in the chair, smaller than I had ever seen him. And for the first time in my life, I felt the balance shift. The outsider was no longer at the table's edge. I was the one who set the table now. 3 months later, Maxwell Construction was no more. In its place stood Meridian Construction, sleek new signage gleaming above the company's downtown headquarters. The name change wasn't just branding. It was reclamation. What had once been Robert's crumbling empire was now mine, rebuilt on competence instead of entitlement. And it was working. The numbers spoke first. Profits climbing, projects delivered ahead of schedule, contracts expanding across state lines. But beyond the spreadsheets, there was something else, something intangible, a shift in atmosphere. Employees who once whispered about instability now carried themselves with confidence, knowing their work was secure. For the first time in years, the company had a future worth believing in. Robert still worked there, not as a king, not as a patriarch, but as a foreman. On my visits to job sites, I sometimes caught glimpses of him, steel-toed boots, hard hat pulled low, clipboard in hand. At first, the sight had unsettled me. Robert Hayes, who once presided over holiday dinners like a monarch, now directed crews pouring concrete under the sun. But strangely, he seemed lighter, less brittle, almost human. One afternoon, as I walked a site with a project manager, Robert passed by. Sweat streaked his forehead, his shirt smudged with dust. He paused, meeting my eyes. Morning, Serena, he said quietly. No arrogance, no edge, just simple acknowledgement. I nodded. Morning, Uncle. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. Melissa surprised me most. When the company fell and rose again, she had chosen to stay, this time without titles, without privilege. She started in an entry-level finance role, spreadsheets, and late nights replacing designer handbags and brunches. To everyone's shock, including mine, she adapted. One evening, I passed her office and saw her hunched over a stack of reports, hair pulled back, eyes tired but focused. She glanced up, startled. Oh, Serena, I didn't see you. You're still here? I asked, checking the clock. It was nearly 9. She gave a small, almost sheepish smile. I wanted to get this analysis right. For once, I want to earn it. Her words lingered long after I left. Derek, on the other hand, hadn't lasted a month. His arrogance clashed with accountability, and when deadlines slipped under his watch, I let him go. The last I heard, he was chasing startup dreams in another city, still convinced the world owed him a crown. Linda applied for a position, but without qualifications to lean on, she faltered. She now split her time between volunteering and organizing community events. For the first time, she was learning what it meant to contribute without expecting applause. As for me, my life changed too, not in wealth or status, but in weight. For years, I had carried their survival in silence. I had been the ghost that paid bills, erased debts, saved them without recognition. That silence had been my armor, but also my prison. Now the silence was gone. Every Sunday, I still had dinner with Aunt Margaret. She insisted on cooking herself, even when I offered reservations at the finest restaurants. "Too much noise out there," she said. "I'd rather feed you here." We ate at her modest dining table, the same one from my childhood. She always set a seat for me, as though it had never been in question. One evening, she served roast chicken with rosemary, and as we ate, she smiled softly. "You know, Serena, I'm proud of you." The words hit me harder than any accolade, any Forbes list, any quarterly report, because they came from the only person who had loved me without conditions, without contracts, without blood. Sometimes, late at night, I thought back to that Christmas dinner, to Robert's voice declaring I didn't belong, to Linda's glass raised, Derek's smirk, Melissa's brittle smile, and I thought of how far we had all fallen since then, how far we had risen too. The truth is, family had never been about legacy or bloodlines. Family was about who chose to show up, who chose to rebuild, who chose to change. For years, they had cast me as the outsider. But in the end, the girl they tried to exile had been the one strong enough to hold everything together. I looked out over the city from my office window one evening, the skyline glowing gold in the setting sun. Meridian construction projects dotted the horizon. Bridges, towers, schools, homes, structures built to last. Sometimes people need to lose everything before they can see what they already had. And sometimes the family you save becomes the one you create anew.